second for everyone to populate the site. I want to welcome you to the Center of Addiction and Faith and our monthly webinar. Today, we're excited to welcome our guest, Reverend Seth Perry. He's here today to talk about what it's like to be a pastor living with a dual diagnosis. I'm Pastor Ed Treat. I'm the founder and director of the Center of Addiction and Faith. Our mission here is to awaken faith communities to better understand and respond to addiction. We're trying to get rid of stigma so people can get help. We believe faith communities have a vital role to play in this problem, addressing the addiction crisis. And if they would do so, we could make some headway. We could save lives, reduce crime, reduce homelessness, incarceration, so many issues that are deeply tied to the addiction crisis. Please introduce yourself in the chat page, share your name, where you're located. And then as we go in this, Pastor Seth is going to do a presentation. We'll have a little interview with him, and then we'll have a chance for some Q&A. So as you come up with questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Click that and put your question in there, and it'll be put in order so that we'll take them as they come, and we'll address them later. So please provide your questions. Before we begin, let's pause for a moment of silence to consider those who are struggling with addiction and their loved ones, followed by the Trinity prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. I am pleased to introduce our webinar mediator today, my friend and Pastor George Wood, better known as the Tattooed Pastor. George is a survivor of many things. He now serves as a minister, pastoral counselor, pastoral care counselor, a recovery ministry founder. He's currently building a new ministry that's a recovery farm. He's also the author of the Uncovery and the Uncovery Devotional. George also hosts his own podcast every month called The Sober Truth. George, thanks for being here and thanks for moderating our discussion today.
Absolutely. It is wonderful to be back again with all of you. And I think, for me, it's so exciting each month to come and talk to different people. And we get such a wide variety of individuals that come and share their life and their experiences, and how those of us that are trying to help, those that are struggling with addiction or mental health issues do it better, quite frankly. It's always, near and dear to my heart when it's someone that has walked a path similar to my own. I too remember being a pastor that finally had to acknowledge my addiction and mental health issues many years ago, and the weight that lifted off of me, and yet the anxiety in going into that. And so we're going to hear from Pastor Seth Perry today, who is a Lutheran pastor who has been openly living with a dual diagnosis that he brought to the public a couple years back. And now he works tirelessly to destigmatize and to educate the masses on what it means to have a dual diagnosis and mental health issues and addiction issues, and how to better walk with people that are struggling themselves. And so having Seth with us today is such an honor for me to be able to moderate a conversation like this, and to just be part of something like this to be brought to all of you. And so I want to remind everyone that, just like Pastor Ed said, please, as we're going through the conversation, leave your comments and questions below, because a lot of times I know that we're so blown away in the conversation that we forget. And then everybody's trying to do it all at the last moment, but it helps me as the moderator as I see the questions ahead of time. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Pastor Seth Perry, who is going to share with us. Seth, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and I'm grateful that everyone is here today. Thanks so much. And I will share a little bit about myself. Like everyone said, I'm Pastor Seth Perry, and I want to tell you everything that I'm not. So first of all, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a counselor. I'm not an addictions counselor, a psychiatric nurse, medical professional, or a pharmacist. And I say these things because as a pastor, when I self-disclosed of being someone who lives with a mental health condition, people sought out my professional advice in these areas. But it's really important that folks in church land make sure to use referrals and continue to build relationships with people we can refer to who provide professional services that are listed here. But what am I then? I'm living well with bipolar type 1. I'm dually diagnosed. I'm a husband, a dog dad, a son, a brother, an uncle, a recovering addict, and I am a pastor. It's amazing that I'm able to be all these things and to provide this list to you because things were pretty bad, and I'm going to share about how bad they got. So here we go. My goal today is to share what it's like to be a pastor with a dual diagnosis. And I really never thought that I would be able to say that out loud, that I'd be able to share that I have a serious mental health condition that really almost took me down, and that I'd be able to be in my office right now at the church that I'm a pastor of saying this. So I'm still amazed that, even after this amount of time being public with my diagnosis, that I can still do that. So let's get into it. Today, I'm going to show you how I turned my challenges with my dual diagnosis and the stigma I felt as a pastor with a dual diagnosis into a productive ministry project. Because it's not the entire ministry that I do, it is a portion of what I do as a pastor. So I do everything that a normal pastor does, but I also have a ministry project dedicated to mental health and addiction recovery. So I'm going to ask all of you this question. What does mental health look like? Take 5 seconds. I'll count down from 5. What image comes to mind? Okay. Think of an image. Okay. Just an image. So we'll do this countdown from 5 and just think about what that image is. You can put it in the chat right now and let's count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So maybe some of you put an image that came to mind in the chat. Now, here's something that I often find when I search mental health on Google image search. A person with a clipboard. That's always been the image of mental health when I've looked at pamphlets or other information. But for myself, I rarely sat down with a person that had a clipboard to work with my mental health. That's not what the image of mental health was for me. What was the image of mental health? Well, here's one image that isn't necessarily popular in church circles. Um, this, all these medications. This seems to be something that people avoid talking about at church. And what are all these medications here? Well, this is a picture that I actually took because I'm showing you my medication. I've taken the same medication for 15 years. I've been relapse free for 15 years. And this is what mental health looks like to me. That's a component of it. Every night at 10 o'clock, I take this handful of medication. In the church of my youth, psychiatric medications were neither talked about, and also the morality of taking medications was questioned. This was back in the 80s, and it wasn't necessarily the most supportive and safe environment to talk about mental health, specifically things like antidepressants and other things like that. They were seen as a form of weakness. So my story, I'm going to tell my story through institutions over the next 5 to 7 minutes. And I like telling my story through the institutions that I've been a part of. But it starts all the way back before I was born. In 1965 in Buffalo, New York, my great uncle Ralph Hilkert, he was diagnosed as a manic depressive and had severe alcoholism. His death was likely a suicide, and our family never talked about it. In fact, I didn't find out about him until I was 10. I had no idea that he existed. And that speaks to the stigma around mental health and addiction in families like my own, church-going families, very exemplary families in the community. We just hid that fact. And growing up, we always went to church, but we never talked about mental health. That's something our family never talked about, even though it was active in my family that I was raised in. So it all starts at this first institution, Royal Columbian Hospital, New Westminster, British Columbia, Canada. I was born November 1980. And as a kid, you never think you're going to go back to that hospital for any serious issues. That's something that people who had, who were older, they end up back in the hospital. You don't think that throughout your 20s, you're going to be in and out of the hospital like I ended up being. But lo and behold, that's actually what happened. I also grew up around Riverview Hospital. This is a hospital that was built in 1910. It is an old institution, a psychiatric institution. In fact, psychiatric institutions were a cottage industry where I was raised. And on the playground when I was growing up, that was a real cheap way of making fun of someone else, saying, your dad's going to be in Riverview Hospital, or you're going to grow up and be in Riverview Hospital, or you belong in Riverview Hospital. That was the lowest blow. Because right across the street from Riverview Hospital was a forensic psychiatric institution called the Colony Farm. So really, many people in the town that I grew up in worked at these institutions. In fact, here's a picture of where my house was. That's right there on the hill above both of these institutions. I could look out my window and see these things. And it really did frighten me knowing that my uncle, my great uncle, went through these challenges. So mental health and addiction were always sort of a stigma that followed me from a very young age. So I ended up back at Royal Columbian Hospital when I was 16 years old in the family education program because my brother had a psychotic break. And the facilitator at this family education program said, I'm going to put a family tree up on the board. And this is your average family tree that a family affected by a mental health issue looks like. And as they started to draw this family tree, I began to see my actual family drawn up on the board. It seemed like two codependent parents, maybe one or two kids that had mental health issues. I was floored that I could see my own family up there. It brought shivers up my spine. And that's where I knew something was up with my family, but I had nowhere to talk about it. And then fast forward to the summer of 1997, and I stopped going to church. I didn't have any support at my church that I grew up in. So I turned to drugs around this time, and I ended up right back at the hospital with suicidal ideation. And they said there's no intake necessary at this point. Being this young, I was in a deep, deep depression and was thinking of harming myself. But I was turned away from the hospital, and I didn't get any help at this time. My first psychosis happened when I was 18 years old, and my parents found the best help possible. And this is a theme throughout my entire life. My parents went and advocated for me to get the best help that they could find. And I still ended up having a difficult time. And this speaks volumes to the barriers that many people experience when it comes to getting help for their mental health. They found me this doctor named Dr. Bill McEwen, a doctor in White Rock, British Columbia. I reported to him with an extended period with no sleep, a manic episode, drug-induced psychosis, delusions, grandiosity, and suicidal ideation. Even though he was the best doctor possible, what happened next was I went 7 years resisting his help. Much went AWOL from my family. It was a time of chaos and addiction and more. That landed me in my university student crisis center in March 2005 at age 24. I had a manic episode and drug-induced psychosis. I ended up in the hospital for 8 weeks with an extended period of no sleep, manic episode, pressured speech, drug-induced psychosis, audio hallucinations, delusions, grandiosity, suicidal ideation, psychotic symptoms, medication side effects. I was diagnosed finally with bipolar type 1 and I was prescribed mood stabilizers. And then I went into something called the Early Psychosis Intervention Program. I was given the best chance for success. And my parents found this for me because Dr. Bill McEwen, one of the best psychiatrists in all of Canada, was running this program for young people just like me. But I resisted the help. So I lived independently for a while when I was 27 years old. But I stopped taking my medication. And if you can imagine what happens when you stop taking your medication is you end up right back at a psychiatric unit. For 4 weeks, I was back at St. Paul Hospital with an extended period of no sleep, a manic episode with pressured sleep, speech, delusions, grandiosity. The blood test showed that I was off my medication. I was put back on mood stabilizers. But here's the point. Why would my family take me all the way across town to this hospital? Well, there was one reason. They were seeking the best help that they could find me. They drove over 55 minutes to admit me to this hospital to find that best care possible. But I still struggled because in September of 2008, I entered a period of chronic cocaine use. And then back in St. Paul Hospital at age 27 with more of the same symptoms, put back on medication, back out into terminal stage addiction at age 29 years old. And at this time, it should have been the greatest moment of my life. The Olympics was happening in my hometown of Vancouver. I was right in the middle of this big party. And when I look at this picture, all I can think of is psychosis, paranoia, anxiety, and fear. Because when this happened, when I attended this big Olympic party at the end of the Olympics when Canada won the gold medal in hockey, it was my bottom. And I scraped along the bottom for about another 9 weeks. And I was admitted to the hospital again with depression. I needed detox. I had suicidal ideation, off my meds, put back on everything else. And they took me out of the hospital to put me into treatment. And I was lucky enough to get, again, the best help that I could possibly get. I'm very fortunate that my parents did this for me. I stayed in treatment for 5 months. And that's something about having a co-occurring disorder or what we call a dual diagnosis is you do need this amount of treatment. I truly believe that. I see that in many of the people. This is inpatient treatment for 5 months. I wish that this was available to more people. And then I got clean and I became a pastor. So, really, how did that happen? How did I become a pastor? Well, I started being active in my community. I started attending 12-step groups. I started going back to church and I started being active in my family. And a little over a year into my sobriety journey, I got this idea while being in church, looking at the pastor, and I said, I like what he's doing. I think I could do it. And so that curiosity grew and grew and grew. And I got more and more opportunities to be active in the seminary. And then they recruited me. And then suddenly I was ordained a pastor. And that through that whole process of becoming a pastor, I got psychological testing. I was terrified about that. I had to talk to a psychologist about my history of addiction and mental health, but they said, yeah, you're okay, you're good to go. But the way that mental health was talked about at the seminary and at churches absolutely terrified me. So I was very comfortable sharing with many people that I had an issue with addiction. And that's what I shared with people through my whole period of being an intern pastor and in the early time after ordination, where I would say, yeah, X amount of years clean and sober, and I would never add that I have a dual diagnosis. I didn't want to tell people that I had bipolar disorder because I thought that your average person who goes to church was going to be afraid that I was going to fly off the handle because I heard the way that people spoke about mood disorders, and it really concerned me, and I couldn't take it anymore. So 2 years ago, I created a video and I put that up online. And I announced to everybody at the beginning of Lent that I was a pastor and I was living well with bipolar disorder. Very quickly, I had 1,100 views on that video. And here's a screenshot from the video, and I went public. I was absolutely overwhelmed with the amount of emails, phone calls, all positive, but still overwhelming nonetheless. And a lot of questions about what can I do about my relative? What can I do about my son? What can I do about my daughter, my cousin, my father, who is dealing with a mental health condition? The other thing, as a pastor in the rural community, people started coming to me and saying, we have not talked about the history of suicide in our community and in our church. And it goes back 170 years. We're a rural community. It's something that afflicts us specifically. People don't get the help that they need in this rural community. So, what happened after going public? Well, I decided to turn it into a ministry project that I call Our Stigma. I've written a devotional last year called Our Stigma, and also I joined the Washington County Opioid Settlement Council recently. Here I am right there. You can see me with other council members. Because I was public about this, I was offered to be a part of some advocacy and public service. And this was something I never thought to be a part of, because right here in this picture, you see people that are psychiatrists, doctors, social workers, and for them to say, we want someone from a faith community who can talk about lived experience and mental health, we'd love to have you on board. And this is something I never, ever dreamed of. So what this committee that I'm a part of does is it reallocates funds that are taken in from opioid settlements from pharmaceutical companies to my local county and out to organizations that fill out grant applications for that money. I've been able to build partnerships because I'm on this council. I was awarded money to create a podcast and educational resource for churches and communities, and it comes out this May. So I've been able to form a relationship with Farhia Budul. We collaborated on an episode of the podcast comparing my context with her context. She is a Somali American licensed addictions counselor, and we talked about her dual diagnosis, anxiety and addiction disorder, on the episode of the podcast that we collaborated for. And I had no idea that I would ever be able to make these cross-cultural, multicultural relationships when I decided to just make a public announcement that I had bipolar disorder and I was a pastor. I've been able to connect with the American Indian Family Center, and they invited me in and had a conversation with them. I'm collaborating with them on an episode of my podcast, an educational resource for congregations and community groups. I have a close relationship with Richard Wright, the elder. You see him in the tan pants there, and they were very happy to see me. Never thought that I would be able to have these types of relationships in recovery. Uh, and it all started with me saying, I'm a pastor and I have bipolar disorder, and throwing a video up online. I'm connected with the Emmanuel Assembly of God. This is a Hmong congregation. I've been working with them, collaborating with them on an episode of the podcast. Again, completely surprised that I would be able to learn about other cultures and also be invited to be a guest and collaborate. It's amazing. So this project that I've created is a 6-part limited series podcast. It's a docu-series, an educational resource that's releasing in May. And this has been a project that I worked on because I was open about my mental health condition. It's something that I discerned to be a leader and be open about it. And this is just the fruits that have come of as a result of that. So I want you to stop everything and make sure you subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com/ at our stigma, youtube.com/ at our stigma, because then you will know on May 1st when our the resource for communities comes out, which is our 6-part docu-series podcast, 1 episode per week for a 6-week period. And on my website, ourstigma.com, there will also be a discussion resource to guide an hour and 15-minute discussion. It'd be a 4-series discussion. So over a period of 4 weeks, you'd be able to discuss the intercultural, cross-cultural relationships that I've created and look at very important issues in regards to dual diagnosis, mental health conditions, and also addictions. So what I did is I was able to, in this documentary, highlight how culturally specific addiction and mental health treatment is the foundation to recovery in marginalized communities. So I want to share one thing that I've learned since I've gone public with my mental health condition, and that's this. I work in a rural context. I work with people who have barriers to their treatment of mental health and addiction, where the big barrier is telehealth isn't always the most appealing situation for someone to be in to get their care, to see a psychiatrist or an addiction counselor through a screen. Doesn't necessarily work in the rural setting. But I work with people that have to get care that's 25, 30, or 35 minutes away from them if they're dealing with a psychiatric or a mental health condition. So that has been the challenge in my specific context. But I felt like I should journey outside of the boundaries of my community and learn how other people are affected. And I've been able to discover the specific cultural and religious issues that people experience that are very comparable to the own stigma that I feel and the people that I pastor feel. And it has been a liberating experience, an eye-opening experience, an experience that I really hope to share with a broad audience. And I've learned so much that I've been able to apply back to my context, and that's where the value is for me. In working with people outside of my specific cultural context, I have learned new tricks. I have learned new avenues. I have made new connections that I never even dreamed of. And also for everyone who is in the Twin Cities area, May 3rd in Stillwater, I'm hosting a large mental health faith forum. It's an in-person event only. And this is all the information that I'll have up on the screen. You can email me at info@ourstigma if you want any more information about registration. And so we come to the end of my discussion. I am going to hand it over to George, and he may have some questions for me.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, brother. That is super powerful and just really encouraging, because I think that, it's interesting how I can, tell somebody I have an addiction problem. And for me, it was many years of, okay, finally, I told people I have addiction issues, but I didn't tell them about my mental health issues. And it wasn't until COVID that I finally went public with my multiple suicide attempts and my battles with suicidal ideation that I still struggle with. And just even after all that time, like why we keep seeing certain parts of ourselves kind of locked away is something I haven't completely figured out. But I do know that it helped me be a fuller and better person once I came out with everything. And so thank you so much for sharing. I think for me, one of the first, questions that jumps out at me as I was making some notes is like, for you, what are some of the challenges that you have currently, like of navigating both your recovery personally and faith? Because a lot of times, at least for me, my recovery changes how I see my faith a lot. So just what is it, what is your journey like currently on a personal level of navigating recovery and faith at the same time?
So my personal experience with my faith perspective on my recovery, both mental health and addiction recovery, kind of all lumped together. I'll say that. My personal experience is I have a deep understanding of how my walk to get to where I've been, my journey to get to where I've been as a person and as a pastor. I understand where God has been at in all of that. And, I have not had an amazing conversion experience. It's been for the people that know AA literature, it's been an educational variety of spiritual experience. It was slowly over a period of time. I had more and more things revealed to me, about why I shouldn't have shame to live with a mental health condition, and why I shouldn't have shame, and to be surprised where God is at work in my life. So that's one thing. And the problem is I enter into recovery circles where people make the assumption that I have had an amazing, bright, shining conversion experience, or that I believe specific things that maybe they think I believe, but I don't. And so I really like to speak in a very neutral way about spirituality when I'm talking to people as a recovering addict and as someone in mental health recovery. As a pastor, I can speak more from my own specific theological understanding, but I have two different Seths. Certainly have a pastor Seth, and I have a Seth in recovery Seth. Those are two very, very distinct ways of talking to people and identifying, with other people, because yeah, because they're definitely different.
Yeah, yeah, right. What would you say, like, what does your recovery look like? I know you kind of, told us the broad spaces, but like, how do you stay mentally healthy personally?
I have regular counseling appointments. I have regular psychiatric nurse practitioner appointments that are both of those are telehealth for me. So that's the foundation. And then regular attendance at AA and NA meetings. So that keeps me in contact with people on a daily level. I wake up in the morning and I read two recovery meditations and share in two group chats to start my day. Prayer, and then I have a list of spiritual practices that are all kind of related to my recovery that I work on getting through to make sure that I do. So some of those things are like I to make sure I'm well, that I'm reading recovery literature, that I'm in bed reading a book at 10 and not looking at a screen. Like I know those are small things, but that's a huge thing in terms of a regular practice that's going to keep me well. And also force myself to be in contact with people that I know are good influences on me. So I'm sending recovery texts to people that I know from 12-step groups. And I mean, I was speaking with a politician here in Minnesota, and I was at his office, and then he said, "So what do you do? What do you do to treat your bipolar disorder?" And one of the first things I said was, "I go to 12-step meetings. That's part of my mental health recovery." And more and more and more and more in 12-step spaces, people are okay saying, "I have generalized anxiety disorder, I have bipolar disorder, I'm schizophrenic." They're okay saying that, where when I got clean 15 years ago, people were a little more reluctant to do that.
Would you mind kind of giving your description of what bipolar 1 is and compared to like bipolar 2? Because these definitely are not terms that most people they
Yeah.
think they know, but they don't know, and they can be different.
Yeah. So bipolar 1 means that I have extreme um, uh, manic episodes that require hospitalization, followed by extended periods, which would be in the months of depression afterwards. So a manic episode that would last around 8 to 14 days, followed by 2 to 3 months of extended depression, just crippling depression. Uh, Bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 both require treatment of medication, and they're different. So I'm on mood stabilizers and an antipsychotic, and I've been on those for 15 years. Uh, there would be less medication given to your average person who is diagnosed bipolar 2, and a person with bipolar 2, just a standard bipolar 2 diagnosis, would not see as high of a manic episode as I would experience, and would not probably have as low of a depression, but would see higher frequency of those ups and downs. And some people are rapid cycling, or end up in mixed states. So rapid cycling would mean like, you'd be like, last week I was feeling up and I was, had lots of energy. This week I can't get off the bed, out of the bed, right? And so those are your key differences.
Yeah, it's I think people really get confused with that a lot of times, and so they just assume, and unfortunately, so often we're educated by the wrong places, whether
Yeah.
it's movies or TV or whatever. In your experience, how can the church do better to integrate mental health and addiction recovery?
Well, I think that one thing that they need to do is look at who they are partnering with, um, and actually go through a careful discernment process about what the best option of who they will partner with should be. Because I believe that outside of what can be done internally in a church, there has to be some level of community outreach and partnering with organizations. So the kinds of organizations that I'm thinking about are organizations like recovery community organizations, or uh, other nonprofits. I think that people often say NAMI is an excellent nonprofit to partner with, and that's good. But there may be some nonprofits in your area that are doing work that aligns with your church, that churches should consider partnering with. And some of those may be multi-faith organizations, or organizations from different faith communities as well. So the key part to doing this is there needs to be some very careful discernment about, is your church expending too many resources to try and make a partnership happen? And have they spent enough time thinking about what the community surrounding your church really needs? Because sometimes in church world, people will start throwing out ideas, and then suddenly six potential projects will be on the slate, and everyone will get burnt out. And I've seen that. And there should be an intentional year or year and a half of planning and discernment before the organization decides to actually make a partnership happen. Yeah.
We have a question on here from I can't see the name, but the question was, where does it's from Paul Kiss. Where does trauma fit in with the MI and SUD model?
Well, I would say there's a few different types of trauma that that I have experienced. So I'll first talk about trauma that happens to the individual. So in my context as a pastor, when someone discloses that trauma has happened to them, then I need to make sure that they're being treated. So specifically, if someone is suffering from PTSD, it's often some folks are not willing to necessarily go through the process of accepting a referral from me. And I just know that if someone reports trauma to me, that what I will do is make sure that they get to see a psychiatrist. And then I also recommend that here at church, this is a place that is not necessarily going to be safe for you to engage in deep discussions publicly about your deepest trauma. You can talk to me privately about it to a certain extent, but I'm not qualified to do that. And someone could, I think that one of the biggest the biggest gifts that I have, having already worked in a clinical setting, is that I can understand that people need to not re-traumatize themselves by going into descriptions of what they've happened, which is totally something that could happen in a church context. If people are encouraged to provide testimony about how they've overcome things in their past, and they haven't received psychiatric intervention for their PTSD, then they could just be re-traumatizing themselves. And it's something that I have seen. But the other part, when I think of trauma as well, is generational trauma is something that I need to be able to be aware of. And part of the project that I'm working on has a huge educational component around generational trauma in Indigenous communities and in African American communities. And that is where culturally specific treatment comes in. So Indigenous people are going to be able to treat and heal folks in ways that I cannot. And the same goes for African American communities as well. So that's the other part, is this particular trauma an institutional or generational trauma?
Very cool. Very good. Pastor Ed, you're on our screen.
Yeah, thanks, George. And Seth, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm so excited you're doing this work because, we focus on addiction, but I really believe underneath almost every addiction, there's mental health issues that need to be addressed, and I'm one of those. I've had to deal with some of that myself and continue to do so. But I want to just take briefly. I talked to a church last night. I was at a church meeting of an addiction awareness team, and I think that the sense is, and my sense over the years of doing this work, is that the reaction of people that don't have addiction, they don't have mental health, or don't know they don't, is that's for those people. I mean, and so people sort of dismiss it like it's not my problem. But I really think what people need to recognize, and I think that's part of the denial of these diseases, is that this is everybody's problem. We all participate in it. Just like with an addict who goes in for treatment, they say we have to treat the whole family, or that addict has very little chance of succeeding. And so everybody in the family says, "Well, why do I need this? I don't have the problem. It's him." But they're very clear that it's systemic, and this country's a mess. And you were talking about generational trauma. I would like to have a conversation sometime about historical trauma, white trauma. We immigrated here from traumatic places and traumatic experiences. We went through a civil war. We went through slavery. We enslaved people, and we have guilt from that. And we have trauma, unresolved trauma as a country. And this addiction crisis, which is a crisis, and it's kind of an emerging crisis, that this new administration has elevated fentanyl to be the biggest security threat in the country. But mental health and addiction are exploding. And unless we all recognize our role in it, we don't have much chance of succeeding. I mean, we can treat people over and over, but it just gets perpetuated unless the people that are part of it realize that they have a role to play and they have some recovery. So we're driving the center of it. This is my commercial right now. The Center of Addiction and Faith is driving this conversation and lifting up these conversations so that we can get rid of the stigma, because the stigma is the barrier, and the stigma, and as well denial. People need to recognize that they have a role to play. And even if you don't think you have a role to play, you're impacted by it. You're helping to pay the cost of this because it's costing us all in so many ways. So we're having these challenging conversations, but also very hopeful conversations for people who struggle. That the church would finally be talking about this, and that's our work as the Center of Addiction and Faith, is to make these things open up those walls and allow people to get well. And so I hope you'll support our work. We do need your support. We're a nonprofit. We're relatively new, and we're just trying to make it. We need support, even if it's a little bit. I put some links in the chat page. If you can help us out, we sure appreciate it. Please give what you can. Follow the links and make a donation. And if you can make it a monthly gift, that'd even be better. But I really appreciate the support. Thank you. And now we'll move into some questions and answers. Um, we get a pretty good turnout at these webinars, but George, I'm finding at the end of them we don't get as many questions as I would imagine.
That's why I always kind of chime in and tell
Yeah.
everybody, please leave the questions. I know that a lot of times I mean, I have a horrible time of getting questions on my own podcast because I talk and they just like, oh, I forgot to ask anything. So
Yeah.
I get that. I did want to say though, Seth, Barry Lehman is a great friend of mine, and Pastor Ed's, and he commented in here that he's moving to Mendota Heights and looks forward to meeting you someday. So he's an awesome guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's been on the webinar, and just as an overall, just a really great dude. So I highly recommend meeting him. Tell me, Seth, I wanted to make sure, now you wrote a book, right? What is the name of your book and how can people get it?
Yeah, Our Stigma, it will be it'll be released as an ebook later this summer. And I only do limited runs on it. So I'll have some at the Festival of Homiletics this year, but later you'll be able to get it as an ebook later this summer. But I mean, for everybody, if you want to follow me, the best way to follow me is on YouTube at YouTube / at Our Stigma. That's how you'll be able to find the podcast when it comes out. And yeah, make sure to click that link. I see a question though from Bethany. When sharing your recovery and faith experience becomes your job, how do you protect your wellness? Yeah, I struggle with that. I think every pastor struggles with protecting wellness. And I think that the honest answer to that is I end up neglecting my wellness, and then have to course correct and adjust. I think that has been my journey over the last 2 years, especially since I went public with my mental health diagnosis, is trying to be vulnerable with my support network and letting people know that I'm not doing well, and I I need to make sure to do the things that, like, eat well, exercise, sleep well, and not take on too much. So that's my answer there. I see other questions too.
Yeah, Katie's putting them up for us.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, this one from Jerry. Do you have any suggestions about how to be helpful to people in the congregation who are struggling with bipolar, especially when they're cycling and not following instructions from health professionals?
Yeah, I think the best advice is, first of all, to be patient. That's the first thing. And then, secondly, I think that if you don't know much about bipolar disorder, then I think that you should probably do some research on it. There is a podcast called Inside Bipolar. It will give you handy. It's by Healthline Media, and it will give you very handy advice on what it's like to live with bipolar disorder. Um, and also, the other thing I'm going to say is normalize making boundaries with someone who has a mental health condition. So explain, these are the ways I will provide you support, and these are the ways I won't provide you support. And I have boundaries like that with everybody in my life. So people have created those boundaries with me. And so myself as a pastor with someone who has bipolar disorder, if they ever ask for help that is reasonable, then I will provide that help for them. If I want to check in with someone about their mental health, it's best to do it one-on-one first. If you're concerned. And the best way to do that is to treat them like you would anyone that may be dealing with anything. If you're going to take someone out who's living with any other type of disease and you're concerned about them, if someone is in the middle of chemotherapy, if someone is just dealing with a new diabetic diagnosis, or if someone is has a heart condition and is trying to change their diet or whatever, I think that if you wanted to provide support to that person, you would sit down and have a conversation with them and not lead right into your concerns, really. But the ministry of presence goes a long way, right? So those are all my thoughts.
I
So
have a go ahead, Pastor Ed.
can I ask for it real quick? I, when I was in my addiction, I didn't know I was. I really thought I knew I had something wrong with me, but I didn't know quite what it was. But I didn't think it was addiction. I'm wondering, is it the same for you? I'm wondering which one you dealt with first, addiction or your mental health issues, which came first, and then when you're in a state, let's say somebody like was just asked, somebody's acting out of their mental illness and active in it, are they aware they are not functioning as a normal person, or is it just like with the disease, you have no idea, you're kind of can't see it?
Yeah. So I would say that the early signs of a mental health condition showed themselves in insomnia and anxiety when I was very young, 11 or 12. Using drugs pushed my mental health to the limit so that by the time I was 19, then I had serious side effects. And those initial times when I was having manic episodes, I was unaware that I was having manic episodes. And sometime over the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years, I began to build a little bit of awareness that I was having it. But ultimately, at some point, my mania would mean that I would lose complete awareness of my symptoms. Overall, though there is a level of delusion that is similar to the delusion that you have. And I'm talking about the similar to the delusion that you'd have you would say that someone in addiction has complete delusion and denial over their use. Certain aspects of behavior that, and those come to the surface with spending money, or being overly talkative, or being late, or not being able to fulfill the needs of your employment contract, all sorts of things like that. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's really good. That's super helpful. I have had somebody text me directly. Do you have any idea, bipolar one? I know you said when you gave the description of being manic and then periods of being down, is there a bipolar or anything that you know of where the person is constantly manic and occasionally a little less manic, but what you just said about how when they're in the middle of their mania, they can't see anything. Like they don't, but when they're a little less elevated, they do know some of the signs, but they're constantly manic.
Mhm. So the question is,
Is that a form of bipolar, or
if they're only showing forms of mania.
right?
Um, so there are mood disorders that fall into that description that are related to bipolar disorder, and there are many. Um, and so I would say, and this is the key part, why I mentioned medication. Medication brings the awareness, right?
Mhm.
And medication compliance, um, and the habit of taking medication are the foundation. They are the cornerstone of wellness, and why I have awareness now, and why I know what's good for me. The longer I take medication, the better it works, right? Myself at 1 year clean, 5 years clean, 10 years clean to now, the awareness though that I have it only continues to grow. The more I understand the condition that I have, right? And so I hope that kind of response helps. Yeah.
Yeah, she said yes, it did.
Okay.
So okay, well,
Yeah,
good.
some great comments in the chat page. I'm going to intervene here and let you know our hour has quickly gone by. This has been absolutely fascinating. We need to do more with this. Both of these gentlemen are on the board of the Center of Addiction and Faith, so I hope we can expand this conversation over the coming years. Want to make this a big piece of what we do. So thank you to our guest, Seth, Pastor Perry. Uh, if you want to know more about him, his website link is in the chat page. Katie put it there. You need to grab it now because when there it is again. Wait, Katie, you're really fast.
You're
Um,
really
yeah, and watch for his book of devotions. And Seth, just thank you for your insights and your willingness to be open about yourself. And it gives a lot of courage and a lot of hope to a lot of people. So thank you. And what a great way to help other people is to be vulnerable and genuine.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
these webinars are recorded and available on our smartphone app and website, along with a library of all of our other resources. They're all free. We provide them free. I keep having people say I should charge for everything, and it's like, no, this is important. It should be free. I don't want to put any barriers, but that requires support from supporters. So we could use more of those. Don't forget to download our app. If you go to your app store, look for Center of Addiction and Faith, you'll find a wealth of people are amazed at what is all on there that is helpful and useful. But you'll find everything you need, including links to these webinars and some of our podcasts and many other things. There's a help finder on there too. If you're clergy or you're someone who helps care for other people, you can use that help finder to find them the exact kind of help they need. Put in your zip code and you can zero in on mental health. You can zero in on addiction. You can find detox. You can find what you need. Next month, our we'll be talking about addiction and treatment for older people, featuring Brian Neat from Rockbridge Treatment Center. He'll talk about the particular issues of those who may be older and struggling with addiction. We tend to think that it's a young person's problem, but there's growing evidence that the older population is hurting too, and using more than they should, and no doubt have mental health issues that have not been addressed. So we'll be talking about all of that. Again, thanks, George, for your leadership and your special presence. And
Yeah.
thank you all for taking the time to be here today. It was great having you, and I hope to see you next month.
Yep.
God's
Thank you.
peace be with you.
Peace.